Okay. Hi, everybody. I will indeed speak about a really burning problem for all of us. And the problem with this, with the solution, that the solution is under debate. So we basically have solution in hand, and there's a lot of issues with getting into work. And I leave it to you to decide after my talk whether that's something we should continue and go with, or just basically leave on to die, let's say. So basically, our major problem is really feeding this world. And this problem comes, of course, from the great increase in population. As you can see here, we are now standing in something like 7 billion people, and we are heading towards, that's a prediction, but in 2050 on something like 9.7. And in later in 21, we are basically going towards 11 billion. So how do we really feed this world? For all of us, it's really very simple. Every day we go to the supermarket, we have this great assortment of really things that we can eat and drink, other fruits, cereals, any kind of really crop that we want to have, we can just go ahead and buy it. These crops, or these plants or food basically has all we need to get enough nutrients, micronutrients, vitamins, and so on. But this is not the case for really a lot of, quite a lot of people worldwide in the developing countries, which have really a problem to get the required nutrition to live healthy. So many of these communities, population in the developing countries, in fact, are living on a sort of a mono diet. They will eat rice in the morning, in the afternoon, and in the evening, and they get a very low amount of this nutritious stuff that we need. So we are not talking only on really crop yield, or the amount that we can produce, but also on the nutritional value. So in fact, most of us probably think, okay, we have a starvation problem, but this is not really, that's one of the main things. But another issue is really the nutritional value that a lot of us, or a lot of people in the world get. So malnutrition is a major problem. It's also a sort of a vicious cycle, because when you start with malnutrition, you go for compromised immunity, you go for infections, diseases, low nutrient uptake, as I mentioned, poor nutrient utilization, and there comes also socioeconomic instability. So this leads to affects a lot the society itself. This is just saying something about, I found it on the internet, that fruit that we get in our shampoo, in fact, is much more than a lot of people getting in the developing countries. So this really impacts our life. And in fact, the solution until today was really great. So we have domestication starting from 13,000 years ago, where really human being and made a tremendous difference in what we eat. So look at these tomatoes here. You probably will not recognize it as a tomato, but or tomato. Sorry, I'm here in the UK. I should say tomato, but basically this is the sort of the ancestor of our tomato of today. It doesn't get red, as we are used to from lycopene, the carotenoids that is produced in this fruit, but stays very small and typically green. Look at other plant species that are the crops of today. This is maize. You can see it also here. This teosinte is the progenitor of the modern maize, this hybrid corn here. And you see all these carrots. That's how the wild carrot looks like. This is a banana, watermelons, and so on. So really, we have great solution during domestication. We managed to get to really made a big change, but that's not really sufficient anymore. Now, it's not only domestication that gave solution until today, but it's also in terms of breeding. So this guy, basically Norman Borlaug, that won a Nobel Prize in the 70s, managed to produce through breeding and classical breeding, managed to produce this very dwarf wheat variety that make a huge difference for really in terms of amount and yield that we can get. So he just made a variety that is shorter, and this also solved one problem, which is the falling of the, or so-called, basically the falling of the earlier varieties, which makes, it's called lodging. So it's basically a major problem where we lose a lot of the of the plants. And it also tripled the number of grains in the varieties, which make really a so-called the green revolution. But we come now to a stage that this green revolution needs another revolution, and we need a change to really increase more the yield of as we get. And this was done by classical breeding. Classical breeding means that you take one variety from the UK and another variety from South America, you cross them, and you breed for a sort of offspring that is much better in quality and let's say yield and quality. But breeding really did a major job. But when you do this, when you really want to do classical breeding or you breed in this way, you are very limited. So you cannot cross a potato with maize. You can only cross in a very related species. So you are very, very limited in your variation. And the variation is the source of future new varieties that may be very, very different. And the evidence from this comes from really what we have now in terms of genetic engineering. So the only two traits that are now the major ones that are being bred using genetic engineering are actually ones that are using genes from bacteria and not genes from plants. And so what we have here is sort of a genetic glass ceiling in which classical breeding, as I mentioned before, has a major, major limit. And what can really solve it is basically using genetic engineering and the horrible word of GMOs to really go ahead and really breach this classical ceiling, and from the reason of really having much more variation in genes that we can introduce to new varieties. So what can genetic engineering really do? We can introduce genes from any plant species, but also outside plants. So basically, for example, my lab can take any gene from anywhere and introduce it into a plant if it does something of interest. We can modify existing genes in the plants. We can express genes in higher levels. We can silence genes, so suppress their effect. We can also keep the genes that we change in this specific crop or avoid them from floating over to weeds in the environment, to stop their flow to really places where we don't want to go. Another thing that we can do nowadays, and this was already mentioned today, is the CRISPR. So a lot of the complaints coming from people who don't like GMOs is that we are introducing DNA from any kind of creature, we put it in, and then we really don't know where is it going, and we cannot track it. And we introduce, for example, selection markers like antibiotics to produce them, and they are really, we don't know where is this going. So now this CRISPR technology, where we can edit very surgically the genome of plants and know exactly what we are inserting. It's not something like in classical breeding where you come from one variety to another variety and you move huge chunks of DNA. Here we move and modify very precisely, and we know what we actually modify. So the sad case is that we have on the shelf really hundreds of solutions. I'm serious about that, for many, many problems and for modifying many, many traits, including yields and quality and nutrition, but we are not using them. I will not go to the reason exactly or why is it so difficult now, but basically we have only two traits. This is herbicide resistance and pesticide resistance, and this is basically these are only grown so 90% of these engineered plants are grown in only 5 major countries. It's the US, Canada, and South America. You have Argentina and Brazil, and also in India, and of course a little bit in China nowadays. So this is the current states of the use of this technology. And there are a lot of objections. I will not again go into these details. There's details of why people reject this, but basically a lot of the people who object, that's how they see these plants. And it's already for a long time. Me, as I remember myself as a student, already thinking, like many others, that it will things will change in a few years, and this will be a way to go ahead with these novel crops, but still we are quite stuck with it. So I decided to give a few examples of what genetic engineering can do, and this cannot be done, no way, by classical breeding. We are there with classical breeding. You need new genes that will bring new traits of interest. So, for example, insect resistance. You look at these insects, they look very, very nice or cute, but basically these guys can go into a field and destroy the whole field, just eat everything all through the field and finish with the yield with the crop for particular farmers. And this is one is the corn borer from maize, and this is another insect that will eat the cotton flour. And what have been done is actually introducing a gene from bacteria, bacteria called Bacillus, which produces a toxin that will be, of course, toxic to these insects. So this is something that has been grown in these countries that I mentioned already for a long time. So we're talking about 20 years of using this technology, and because, as I mentioned, there are a lot of ideas of why it's not safe, but this has been used already for 20 years, nearly. And what you see here is India, until the beginning of using this so-called BT, the yields of cotton in India have been increased dramatically since 2003 when this BT cotton has been introduced. I personally visited farmers in India and were extremely, extremely happy of using this technology. So basically we have major advantages for using BT. First of all, the yield increase is amazing, as I mentioned. There's very much reduction in pesticides use, and this is very important because farmers in India, a lot of them are really dying from spraying so much. The ones that are not using BT plants, they're inhaling a lot of chemistry while spraying lots of pesticides on plants. There's a reduced cost of cultivation, reduced farming risk. So that means that the farmer that when he's really growing something, he knows that he will get something in the end. And of course, it's very eco-friendly. So there are major advantages in using this technology. This was more on yield, the BT toxin, but basically, we have also great solution for nutrition. So what you see here, this is called the golden rice. This is a wild-type rice with these white grains, but work that has been done by teams from Switzerland and Germany developed this golden rice which produces the provitamin A. So provitamin A is what we need in order to produce vitamin A in the body. So problems with vitamin A, of insufficient uptake of vitamin A, will make a major health issues for many people in the world. And one of the symptoms is, of course, blindness. And what this group did, in fact, is produce beta-carotene, so this is provitamin A, in very high amounts in this rice grain. So you see they are this kind of yellow-colored. And it's enough to take 1 cup of this rice grain, typical golden rice grain, in order to get sufficient of this beta-carotene for 1 day. So it's really an amazing development, but it's currently really an issue, sort of stuck for many, many years on the shelf. The next ones are 2 examples from my work in the lab. Actually, if you think about it, you want to introduce nutritional stuff into your food, but in many cases, especially in developing countries, where a lot of the crops or plants that can be edible, they have anti-nutritionals in them. One example of this are the alkaloids, so-called solanum alkaloids, so toxic compounds in potatoes. I'm sure all of you, when you go to the supermarket, if you will see a green potato which is sprouting, you might think, I better not buy this one, I might buy this brown one, which is really nice. And the reason behind it, in fact, are these toxic molecules. What we did, in fact, we studied this pathway in potato and other species or related species and identified the whole pathway. And now using CRISPR, we were able to really reduce the amount of these alkaloids and toxic anti-nutritional compounds to really very low levels. So we can now really modify any potato variety to accumulate very low levels of these compounds. Now, my last example will relate to pigments. We have been studying these pigments for some time now, and they are called betalains. So you're probably aware of the ones that are produced in strawberry and apple, which are called anthocyanin. These are different colors, which paint all the cacti species, but also paint this red beet here, and maybe you can recognize other species. This is what you get if you are from East Europe or from Russia, the famous borscht soup. That's what you have there. You have this betalain in your soup. Now, these compounds are really extremely healthy. They're used as supplements, sold as supplements. They're antioxidants. They have many pharmacological activities. And what we have done in recent years is we were able to generate many plants that could accumulate to very high level this kind of nutritional compounds. So what you see here, it's not science fiction, but what you get here is this tomato here. It's a mini tomato that will start produce this red beet color to extremely high amounts in a level which is equal to the ones that you will find in the red beet. You can see that we could do it also in other species like potato here, that's this red potato, and also this eggplant here. And this is what you get, a variety of colors in the flowers when you generate this. What we did here is something that is coming up, or really very much going into development, is so-called synthetic biology, where you can compose really complete pathways through stitching genes, a battery of genes in one go into a plant or into a microorganisms. To do this, to get this red color pigment introduced into tomato and other plants, we actually stitch together 3 genes that together will make this substance made in this plant. So now we have this, basically this fruit, really high, accumulating very high nutritional compound. So I'll just finish with this cartoon. I think that we basically don't have another. Well, this is the best solution we can get at the moment, and it's an excellent solution. And if someone has any other idea how can we go ahead and feed the world, you're welcome to say something. But really, the technology is really very, very valuable. So, set up.